Rain had turned the city into a glossy loom of light and shadow. Dusk pressed its weight on the roofs, and the alleys wore a quiet discomfort that only a city can know. He moved along the margins where the map ends, where storefronts lean into the night and the streets hum with distant motors. He carried a weathered notebook, its pages ruled with names and questions that refused answers. He kept it close, as if the ink could hold a childhood cry he could not bear to forget. People passed with the speed of rumors. A bus sighed by, tires squeaking, and a child laughed somewhere, not far, then vanished behind a rain-slicked wall. He walked past a shuttered cinema, past a bakery that had closed at dusk, past a row of stairways leading to nothing. The city breathed in a rhythm he knew only by instinct. The ache of what cannot be fixed, the longing to understand without the comfort of easy rules. The questions had grown heavier than iron, and he carried them like a weight strapped to his back. A streetlight flickered, throwing yellow halos on puddles. He crouched to study one, how rain tore itself into circles that never quite joined. Then a figure appeared in the glow, a man older, with a coat that whispered when he moved, eyes that held a private gravity. The man did not smile. He stepped closer, not to argue, but to listen. "You search for a map," the stranger said, as if he already knew the form of every fear the other carried. But maps lie. The terrain is not the same for every traveler. Night pressed in. The hood of the notebook's leather cradled a few pages, a pencil stub, a few stains of ink. He asked a question about why children suffer, about who wills pain, and why mercy sometimes arrives too late. The cryptic man spoke with a calm that hummed rather than spoke. "God is not good or evil," he said. "He is not a judge. He is a force, an entity. He does not bow to your simple duality." He paused, letting the words sink. "If you want answers, you must learn to listen to what does not speak." That was not a revelation, but a dare. The man realized his own breath had become loud in his ears, the rain a curtain that made all voices appear distant. He asked if there was a path that did not pretend to deliver comfort. The other's smile creased into something like a map's corner folding open. "Look where you never expect to stand," he said. "Begin with your own tremor and walk toward the edges where people stop believing there is any meaning left." Then he turned and walked away, leaving the man with a notebook cold in his hands and a page that had not yet learned to lie down. He stood, watched the neon signs bleed onto the wet concrete, and decided to walk on. The road ahead might be full of questions that would not resolve, but for the first time, the questions did not fear him back. He followed a side street that would take him deeper into the city's breath, toward a corner where the night held its own slower promise. The rain slowed to a drizzle, not healing, not erasing, but offering a minute of quiet in which a person might tell himself the truth that he was too tired to hide. He walked until the hum of traffic softened into a distant murmur, until a storefront window offered him back his own uncertain gaze. And then he understood that a path was not a solution, but a practice. To walk with questions, to listen for what answers could not speak, to keep faith with the stubborn ache of not knowing. He remembered a scene from his past, someone he loved who suffered, a hospital glow, a hand reaching out in the dark. He did not blame God or fate or the world. He blamed the ache of the unsaid, the elapse of time when help seems too late. He promised himself to seek not an easy grace, but a patient understanding. The city answered in echoes, a dog's bark, a street vendor's radio, the distant tap of a window as rain ran along the sill. The rhythm steadied him, a small quiet sovereignty found in moving through the night with a notebook clutched to his chest. At the corner where two streets meet, he paused and looked at the page with tonight's questions, then closed the notebook to save some memory for morning. He slipped it inside his coat, pressed his palm over the binding, as if to keep the courage there. He exhaled, tasting rain and lamp oil, and walked on, the neon glow painting his silhouette in stripes of blue and red. If the city could teach him one thing, it would be this: a life is not a sentence but a trail. The trail begins in walking and ends in how honestly you can bear to look at the questions you carry. The knight kept time with his breaths, and the margins of the city opened just enough to let him move forward. The notebook weighed a little more now, as if the weight of the city pressed down and through him. He pressed his lips together, mapping the next step with careful precision, not toward certainty, but toward a steadier doubt. In that moment, the burden of why felt less like a verdict and more like a compass. The knight kept time with his breaths, and the margins of the city opened just enough to let him move forward.
Rain returned to the city in slow, careful sheets. It did not pound. It spoke in thin lines of silver that clung to the edges of the alley, turning grit into glitter and neon into memory. The man moved, shoulders hunched a touch, not because of cold, but because of the line he walked between question and sleep. He had come here to listen, to measure the ache inside him against the word he hoped to find. Why? Why does God allow such suffering? Why the small children who sleep too little, the old who tremble at night, the uncounted herd of strangers? The alley opened like a carved throat between two buildings. On one side, a gutter whispered of every quarrel that never leaves the city. On the other, a wall carried the rain in rivulets that looked, at a glance, like ink. He paused under a thin light that trembled at the edge of a broken street lamp, and in that tremor, he felt an eye on him, even before he turned. From the depths of shadow, a figure stepped out. A cloak hung heavy with the damp, as if stitched from night itself, and beneath it, a face kept to the shade, features drawn clear by purpose rather than light. He did not seem surprised to be seen. The stranger moved with a calm that did not need to hurry, as though time had grown patient in his presence. "You seek a map for pain," the man said, not loud, as if speaking to a child's ear, and the wind offered a sigh to carry the words. The other man inclined his head, just enough that the gesture might mean both greeting and dispute. "I do not sell maps," the cryptic one answered, voice more instrument than voice, the way a bell sounds when it is tuned to a question no one dares to speak aloud. "I offer entrances." The man shifted, uncertainty flaring briefly in his eyes. "Entrances? To where? To why? To what is allowed and what is not?" The cryptic man let the rain murmur against his hood. "To what lies beyond a line drawn between good and evil, between yes and no. To the space where a thing is simply what it is, not what it should be." The question pressed back. Why would God permit so much harm? Why would mercy permit a child to suffer? He watched the stranger's lips move in slow, deliberate shapes, as if the syllables themselves were being tested before they could hurt him. God is not a verdict. He is the axis on which the world spins, neither guilty nor innocent by choice, but bound to the world's turning. To label him as good or evil is to mistake a larger gravity for a small fire. The man felt a pull toward contradiction, a hinge his mind could not fully close. If God is not good, not evil, what are we left with? The possibility that choice is not a gift alone, but a weight, the stranger said. That every moment you decide is not a moral victory, but a collision of forces you cannot fully name. The world does not owe you a map. It offers you a compass that only points in a rhythm you must learn to hear. The walls breathed with faint glow, symbols waking, then quiet again, like the street itself listening. The cryptic man stepped closer, so close the scent of rain and old stone filled the space between them. Notice how the symbols do not spell out an answer, but a sentence you must move through, not past the pain, but through it, until it becomes a form you can stand beneath. The man steadied himself against the wall, the night pressing in. "And if I fail?" "Then you fail at the moment you stop listening," came the reply, softer now, as if the whisper had learned to breathe. "And if you pass, you may still walk away without certainty, but you will walk with something steadier, a way to hold the question without making it a weapon." They stood in that hush until the rain slowed, beads falling from the cloak's edge, from the stranger's sleeve, from the city's sigh. The exchange ended not with a vow, but with an opening, a doorway into a room you cannot see until you step across it. The man felt something loosen, a knot perhaps, or a fear. Yet a new thread tugged him forward, toward the unknown corridor the alley had become. When the figure finally retreated into the gloom, the symbols along the brick glowed once more, faintly, then faded. The world did not rearrange itself in that moment. It simply shifted its angle, revealing a horizon that did not promise relief, but offered a map of movement. He walked out of the alley with that map pressed against his ribs, not fully certain of the destination, but certain that the journey had begun, and that the journey was listening to him as surely as he listened to it. Yet as he re-entered the rain-slick street, the city looked almost the same. Only now he knew there were edges to everything, including the question itself, and the edges could be walked along, step by careful step, toward a place where the binary doors opened to a wider chamber, where questions did not end with an answer, but with another way to see.
Rain had left the city behind, but it did not forget. In the room where they spoke, the pale glow wandered along the ceiling like a slow tide. The man across the table did not look heroic or wicked. He looked patient, tired, and precise, as if he had waited years for a door to be opened by a word. The seeker watched the air gather itself, as if it were listening too. The cryptic man began, not with a doctrine, but with a breath, as if a secret could only be spoken when the mouth learned not to crowd the room. He spoke of forces that did not care for our moral maps. God is not good or evil, he said, and the words hovered, not as a verdict, but as a test. God simply is, a force, a field, a current of being that flows through everything and nothing at once. Morality is a human craft, anchoring us to a narrow shore. The current knows neither reward nor punishment. It does not measure a cry by its righteousness. The seeker felt the room tilt as if the walls were listening for a sign. The lamp above them hummed, casting a pale, irregular light that kept its own time, not the clock on the wall. The cryptic man did not speak loudly, but his sentences carried weight, and each phrase fell like a small stone into a deeper pool. "Why do children suffer?" the seeker asked, almost afraid to speak the question aloud. "Why do the innocent bear the worst storms?" The man answered with a slow, almost clinical patience. "Suffering is not punishment. It is the draft that reveals the shape of a being. It tests the limits of a life and shows where resilience hides. If you strip away the comfort, you see what remains: attention, choice, consequence. The current does not choose which lives endure. It simply flows, and life adapts or breaks, and then time moves on." The seeker thought of a city block, of a girl with a gaunt face who once ran to catch a bus, only to be halted by a door that would not open. He thought of an old man who kept a light lit in a window long after midnight, as if he could hold back the dark with a small flame. The images rose and fell in his mind like distant ships on a misted sea. "If God is not good or evil, what is left for us?" he asked, voice steadier than his knees felt. "Responsibility," the cryptic man said simply. "Not the burden of judgment, but the task of choosing with the limited sight you possess. The current will not excuse cowardice, nor reward courage that stops short. You must decide what you owe to one another when the sky is wide and the path uncertain." The plug of silence that followed was not empty. It carried the sound of rain outside, a thin percussion of memory. In that room, the two men let the idea settle like snow on a branch. Heavy, quiet, undeniable. If God is a force, the question becomes less about doctrine and more about a life that can bear the truth of a world without easy answers. There is a moment when the mind worries about itself, when the self trembles at the edge of a thought too large to own. In that moment, the seeker felt a shift, as if a curtain had moved just enough to reveal what lies beyond it. A space where choices are real because they are scarce. The force did not speak again with a grand proclamation. It spoke with a patience that asked for attention, for a slight humility, for a willingness to act with care, even when answers do not arrive. When the pale light crossed their faces in the last line of exchange, the seeker realized that he had not found a neat explanation. He had found a wider horizon, a measure of humility, and a strange permission to live with the mystery rather than the solution. The room breathed with him, and for a moment the night did not seem to press so hard against the glass. He stood and listened to the room, not as if it held a secret, rather as if it had learned to wait with him. Outside, rain began again, softer, as if the city itself exhaled. He stepped into the street with a name for what he carried: responsibility without certainty, faith without a creed, a question that refuses to die. The current did not end at the doorway. It pressed, it opened, and it invited action. He walked away, and the city received him with its ordinary noises, as if the enormous question had finally found a place where it could be thought through, slowly, among ordinary days. The open field lay under dawn like a plain page, the grass bent in a patient wind. The seeker stood a few paces from the cryptic man, two figures against a quiet horizon. Behind them, the city slept in a pale rain, a memory of noise muffled by distance. Here the air was thinner, and every breath felt measured, as if the world were keeping score in silence. The man spoke with a calm that did not pretend to be kind or cruel. "This field is the grammar," he said, "not of words, but of forces that do not care for names. People suffer, children suffer, storms come and bend a day into a question. If there is a God, he is not a judge tallying virtue and sin. He is an order, a mechanism, a field of causes that runs through thing after thing, indifferent to the pain it leaves." The seeker listened and felt trapped by memory and fear. He thought of losses that began as small hurts and grew into something that could not be carried alone. He had believed the world punished wickedness and rewarded virtue, a map with borders that made sense. Now the borders looked crooked, and the rivers within them moved with their own gravity. To test the claim, they walked the field. The grass whispered with each passing foot, and the wind stitched light through the air. They did not hurry. The day slowly revealed its scale. The man did not argue. He offered tests, small adjustments of sight and measure that the seeker could try. First test, memory. The seeker remembered a night when someone he cared for asked for relief, and relief did not come. Was this absence proof of indifference? The man shook his head. No, not indifference, just a system that can fail in ways we misread. The field does not choose who suffers. It accepts that suffering is part of a larger order that no single life can map. Second test, consequence. He pictured a street, a door, a voice that stayed shut. Was this a betrayal of God or a failure of meaning? The man asked him to see it as a hinge that did not fit, a gear out of place, forcing the whole mechanism to adjust. The world offers a shot at repair, but not a guarantee of success. The seeker saw wounds as many gears in a single device, unseen at first glance. He thought of his own griefs, the betrayals, the accidents that marked his days. If the world were a simple moral ledger, why would it tolerate wear? If it were a machine of malice, why would mercy appear at all, even as a spark? The questions did not vanish. They rearranged themselves into a more careful inquiry. The man waited and let the field answer, not with weather or omen, but with scale. The sun rose slowly, and the open space felt like a corridor of sense. The seeker's ache settled into a rhythm, the rhythm of a system that did not require his consent to exist. In this grammar, mercy did not define God. It appeared as a consequence, a byproduct of the order's stubborn existence. By afternoon, the seeker understood something stubborn and ordinary. Suffering is not the negation of meaning, but a segment of it. A chapter necessary to read if one wishes to move forward. The world's wounds do not exist to prove a loving God or a cruel one. They exist because life is a field of forces that persists even when we desire a different arrangement. The fear that haunted his nights did not vanish, but it found a place within a larger sentence, the sentence of existence that does not bend to human longing. They stood near the field's edge as the day shifted toward noon. The field was no longer merely space, but a map of causes and effects. A mechanism whose edge hinted at a horizon of meaning that did not require human approval to be true. The seeker turned to the man, who gave a simple nod, a sign that tests were not conclusions but doors opened. In the end, the seeker did not arrive at a verdict about God. He arrived at a way to live with uncertainty,
to hold suffering as part of something larger, something indifferent and steady. If God is not good or evil, if God is not verdict but presence, the world makes sense not as a moral ledger, but as a pattern of forces that presses forward, through and beyond human longing. The field's patient confirmation of life and the quiet insistence that meaning is not owned but found became a small, stubborn light. Time settled into his bones, and the tests did not give him closure so much as a way to attend. He learned to walk with doubt as a companion, to measure not certainty, but care. He realized his faith had often been a map toward comfort, and certainty had worn a badge of proof. Now the path required vigilance, and attention to how the system reshapes itself when challenged. The world would not bend to his wishes, but it would reveal itself to a patient gaze. They stood again at the field's edge, the wind lifting strands of grass between them. The field stretched between the two figures, a margin of possibility. The distant bells of the city rang faintly, as if reminding them that questions outlive answers. The grammar was named, not finished. In naming it, the seeker found a room within where doubt could rest. Night returns to the city with a quiet insistence. The rain has cooled, the wind holds back, and the pavement keeps a pale, patient shine. He walks the familiar route home, one step after another, as if the rhythm might carry him past a fear he cannot name. He does not seek revelation tonight. He asks only to endure the mystery without flinching. The cryptic man had offered a stance, not a solution. God, he had said, is not a force bent toward mercy or wrath. God is a presence that does not bow to human scales. He is a current in the common air, large enough to hold both pity and horror in the same breath. The seeker repeats the line inwardly, trying to keep it from becoming another creed. It is more like a weather pattern than a law, shifting, impersonal, and true in its stubborn way. On the street, a child's laughter drifts from an open window and then breaks on a sudden hush. A mother calls a name, and the sound folds into the night like a paper crane. A man beneath a street lamp writes a bag of groceries that will be wasted if the rain returns. Suffering walks the city as a plain fact, not a riddle to solve. He touches the railing as he ascends a staircase and feels the weight of patience settle on his shoulders. He had learned to hold two things at once: gratitude for what remains and compassion for what is missing. The old longing to fix everything could still rise inside him, but it did not have to own him. To live with mystery did not mean to surrender to passivity. It meant choosing small, steady acts that kept him from drifting into despair. He could offer a listening presence to strangers who carry quiet grief, and he could allow himself to be changed by what he heard. In the glow of a late neon sign, a memory comes unbidden of the first meeting with the mysterious man. He had asked the question that haunted him: why do people suffer? The answer had arrived not as a theorem, but as a stance. The world is not designed to satisfy our longing for neat endings. It is designed to reveal how we are bound to one another, even when the sight of that bond is painful. The man had spoken with calm certainty, yet his words left room for doubt. It was not a betrayal of faith, but a widening of the frame. That widening becomes a quiet discipline. He begins to notice how small mercies appear when he stops looking away from pain. A neighbor shares bread when another home is short. A stranger lends a coat to a shivering passerby. The city keeps moving, and so does he, with careful attention rather than bold proclamation. He does not pretend to understand the forces behind every misfortune, but he trusts that meaning can emerge in the telling of a life, not in the claiming of every cause. He returns to his own doorway and stands with the key in his hand, listening to the night settle onto the rooftops. The air carries the faint scent of rain and iron, and somewhere a dog barks once and falls silent. He realizes he has learned a fragile truth. Mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a landscape through which one can walk without surrendering to either cynicism or compliance. He will live within that landscape, move through it with care, and keep faith in the resilience of ordinary acts. The room behind him glows with a pale light, He steps inside, closes the door, and chooses to begin again. Not with a manifesto, but with a practice. To listen, to endure, to keep showing up. If God is not good, and if God is not evil, then perhaps goodness and harm are two sharp shapes inside a larger, more indifferent reality. He cannot bend that reality to his will, but he can choose a posture toward it. A posture of attentiveness, humility, and stubborn hope. The night holds its answer, and he walks on, a quiet figure under a quiet sky, carrying renewed resolve to live with mystery and suffering. Even when the news bears only bad news, he remembers that every day holds something true, an act of mercy, a boundary kept, a question asked with care. He understands that living with mystery does not immunize him from fear, but it thickens his skin and steadies his breath. He will tell the truth to himself not by listing the causes of all evils, but by naming the choices that keep him open to others. So the night passes, and the city does not stop. He does not pretend to know the plan, but he chooses to be present to its unfolding, minute by minute.